Thank goodness it is Friday afternoon. That means another really live edition of Green Rush, the business of cannabis talk show that Pro Cannabis Media produces every Friday afternoon from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. That would be your Eastern time. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and I tell you what, this one is really live. Last week, we had a few technical difficulties because I forgot my computer before I drove down to New York, so it's my fault. But we ran a rerun, and everybody seemed to be happy. And we had some good stuff in the chat room, and but this is definitely really live. Joining me this Friday afternoon, and someone who's becoming more and more regular as a guest host, is Josh Kincaid from the Talking Hedge in Washington State. Hello, Josh.
Hey, Jimmy, I'm getting attacked by my cat live right now.
Hey, there you go. What's the name of your cat, Josh?
Panucci. It's French for fudge. Yeah.
All right. And joining us from the nation's capital on this Friday afternoon is our dear friend from Normal. His name is Morgan Fox. Hello, Morgan.
Hey, Jimmy. Hey, Josh.
So here we are. You're in Washington, D.C. I'm in the Boston area, now in Clinton, Massachusetts. Check that one out on your map. And Josh is out in Washington State. So we've got the nation covered here. And I keep hearing these inklings, these rumors, these notes from different people that the lame duck Congress has a shot to reform cannabis laws. How accurate are those reports, Morgan?
Very accurate, although the exact nature of what that reform will look like is really difficult to tell at this point. The negotiations that have been going on between Senate leadership and Senate Republicans about exactly how far they're willing to go and what that balancing point is going to be between what Democrats are willing to support and what Republicans are willing to tolerate, basically, has been kept very close to the vest. I mean, I'll tell you, I was talking with a very prominent senator's staff just the other day, and they said that even they, after multiple requests, hadn't gotten the details about exactly where things stand yet. And I know that many of my advocate colleagues are feeling some similar frustration that we don't exactly know where things are right now. But I think a lot of it also depends on the outcome of the midterms, both in terms of what the makeup of the next House and Senate are going to be, but also how the 5 state legalization ballot initiatives are going to turn out, which, I mean, I think could have a real big impact.
Absolutely. You were talking about Missouri, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Dakota, Maryland, and Arkansas, the 5. Of those 5, which one do you think is the one that is 50-50, may not pass?
Well, so Oklahoma actually isn't happening until March of next year.
Okay.
So, yeah, we're looking at Arkansas, Maryland, Missouri, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Arkansas is 50-50 right now. I am cautiously optimistic that it will pass. We've got about 11 days until the election, and I think that now that the opposition forces have pretty much done everything that they can do, including lying about what the initiative does, pitting supporters against each other, et cetera, that the campaign in favor is really hitting its stride right now and is going to make a big impact on voters as we go forward. Plus, there's a lot of undecided voters there. So I'm cautiously optimistic on that one. Maryland is looking like a slam dunk. Yeah. Washington Post reported 73% support just a little bit ago. And interestingly enough, from a policy and elections wonk like myself, I thought that poll was super interesting because we've always wondered about exactly what effect having cannabis policy reform and legalization measures on the ballot does for the rest of the ballot, whether it's down ticket items, overall voter turnout, et cetera. And really, I think that this might have been the first poll that really showed what impact legalization measures could have on turnout, particularly during a midterm election that typically sees a lot less turnout. And the turnout that it does see always tends to be older and more conservative. But that same poll showed that a majority of the people that were not intending to vote, they expressed that they didn't plan to vote when reminded that marijuana was on the ballot, completely flipped their decision and said that they absolutely were going to vote. So I think it's great to finally start seeing data like that, and I hope that we can get a lot more exit polling and more in-depth research on this concept going forward, so that we can determine exactly how these things affect broader elections and help us fine-tune strategy going forward.
Yeah.
Um, Looking at Missouri, the polling is really all over the place. I mean, last month, two polls came out, one of them showing 62% and one of them showing 48% support. Um, Big undecided margins on both. So I think that it's anybody's guess. I should note that Arkansas and Missouri seem to be the states where there is uh, the most organized opposition, as well as the most establishment opposition. Uh, but in general, I think that these things both stand a chance of really doing well in the elections coming up. The Dakotas are an interesting situation. For North Dakota, we don't really have any recent polling to look at. Um,
Is there enough people in North Dakota actually to conduct a poll?
Well, it'll take you 10 years to get around to everybody. uh, and that's one of the problems with even getting things on the ballot in states like that, because it just costs so much more money to be actually able to reach potential voters and get those signatures. And then when you're talking about outreach, yeah, the media markets are small and relatively inexpensive to start to inundate, but actually getting across to people and doing real grassroots organizing is a lot more difficult when you're in places with lower population density. But we saw that in 2020, voters narrowly rejected a legalization measure in North Dakota. But then the following year, the state House of Reps approved a legalization bill that was then stalled by the Senate. Uh, the initiative this year is very much modeled on the version that the House passed, in order to kind of grease the wheels a little bit and make sure that it wasn't going to be challenged via lawsuit over its constitutionality should it pass, or even before it gets on the ballot. We're pretty confident that that one is going to pass. I'll bet possibly by a narrow margin, but it's impossible to tell at this point. South Dakota is the one that's really kind of a surprise. So, I mean, as you know, in 2020, South Dakota voters approved medical cannabis by a wide margin and adult use by a pretty decent majority. I think it was above 55%. First state ever, and a conservative state no less, to actually pass an adult use initiative without a pre-existing medical program in place. So, I mean, it was really a game changer. And then the governor decided to use taxpayer money to file a lawsuit to invalidate the measure. It went in front of a judge that she appointed, so of course the lawsuit was effective, and then the Supreme Court upheld the appeal. Interestingly enough, the most recent polling that we've seen shows that support for the measure is around just a little bit above 43%. Now, my colleagues on the ground there tell me that that polling is inaccurate. And I think that a lot of things can happen, between now and election day. I mean, generally, though, I think that seeing more than a 10% drop between people actually voting for something 2 years ago and then a very, very similar initiative coming up with, more than 10% less support, it seems a little questionable. So, I think we're going to have to wait and see on that. And admittedly, that most recent polling was from middle of summer. So I'm not sure how much we could trust it. We should take it with a grain of salt. Either way, my colleagues at MPP and a number of other coalition groups are working hard there, and I'm hopeful that the Dakotas will move as well. End of the day, though, we're looking at very, very, very likely at least one state being added after election day.
Right.
Morgan, did you say that it was a ballot initiative or legislative initiative? That
Ballot
last
initiative.
it was okay.
Yeah, and here's an interesting thing about South Dakota, and we all know that Kristi Noem is the governor there, and she's the one who just would not accept what the voters voted in, and she led the charge. But wouldn't you know it, back in August, which was only 3 months ago or 2 months ago, I've lost count at this point. She said she would pledge to implement cannabis legalization if voters approve the ballot initiative. She said that in an event in August. Now, a lot of people think she's changed her tune because she's up for re-election. Is she up for re-election in 11 days?
Well, I mean, I think that even besides that, the amount of backlash that she got for overturning the will of the people and using taxpayer money to do so definitely hurt.
Yeah.
This is actually something that has become somewhat more commonplace as prohibitionists have increasingly lost the hearts and minds of the American people. They know that they can't win on the merit of their arguments because there are none. So they have increasingly turned to either keeping initiatives off the ballot or challenging them after they've won. And this is just patently anti-democratic. But when you don't have winning arguments, you don't have any choice other than to strip away people's voting rights. And it's a lot easier for groups like this to be able to influence lawmakers, largely because they're able to more easily, it's a lot easier to trick a small group of people into believing your BS.
Well, you have a small group of people down there that you haven't been able to manage that well over the last couple, dozen years or so, because there's only so many legislators down there, but they all seem to only be concerned about their own reelection. Josh, I know you've got a question or two. Go ahead.
I'm curious. You mentioned midterm, Morgan, and that how that may impact how things are moving forward. But I'm curious, does it actually matter? It seems bipartisan enough. Does it actually matter what happens in the midterms, or are we just on a train that's moving forward regardless?
Well, I mean, things are definitely progressing, and in one respect, I think that we're going to continue to see progress. I mean, we've got a ton of momentum. Um, and also, it's becoming more and more obvious to lawmakers across the political spectrum that not only is this an issue that their constituents and their bases support, but also that it is not just a fringe issue. It's actually something that they are prioritizing to a much greater level than their elected officials. So, as these realizations start to increasingly dawn on lawmakers, I think we're going to see continued movement in the right direction. There are just some intricacies and nuances that might slow things down or speed things up depending on what happens. And there's so many different variables at play here. But I think that the outcome of the midterms in terms of who controls Congress or either chamber of Congress absolutely will have an impact on what is able to be accomplished in the lame duck. For instance, if Republicans win both chambers, then they have no real reason or political impetus other than the members that are active supporters of this issue to actually move something in the lame duck rather than waiting until the next session when they control things. The same logic goes for if Democrats retain control of both chambers. They no longer have that motivation to get something done under the wire, even though it would surely be very popular for their constituents, particularly in states that have already enacted modern, sensible cannabis policies. If the chambers remain split control, then I think we have a better environment in which to get things done in the lame duck, because it's anybody's guess what will be able to be accomplished in the upcoming session.
Speaking of, will he be able to delist anything? He mentioned that Biden mentioned that before. Was that just to create some hyperbole, or to create some buzz, or is he serious about that? He's actually have some action behind those words. And what's the most likely outcome, you think? Is he going to follow like the liquor, and how that was kind of just left up to the states? Have you heard any updates on that?
All right, so the Biden announcement that called on relevant federal agencies to review the placement of cannabis as a Schedule One substance, it was definitely very useful, because I think it highlighted the fact that Schedule One is an entirely inappropriate placement for cannabis. And it brought a lot of attention to it. There are a lot of people talking about it now. We've heard from these federal agencies that, including the FDA, that this is now a high priority to pursue this review process. However, in order to actually get this review accomplished is going to take a lot of work on the part of many different federal agencies. It's also going to require, if we want a positive outcome, heads of these federal agencies to basically backtrack and admit that they were wrong for decades. Very unlikely to happen. The process itself also takes years, even if it's being fast tracked. Now, if we are looking at the history of the um, schedule review petitions, Normal has been filing these petitions since 1970. And every single time it has taken years to even get the petition accepted. It's taken more years to even get the petition or to get the review process done. And then, as in the case in 1988, when the DEA's own administrative law judge ruled that there was absolutely no reason for cannabis to be on Schedule 1, and that in fact it was, quote, one of the safest therapeutic substances known to man, the DEA said, that's not binding. We're not going to follow that. And that has happened several times since then. So the idea that we can trust federal agencies to conduct this review process and arrive at the right answer that cannabis should be descheduled, because we all know that rescheduling would be an absolute disaster. It would not change the anything about the federal state conflict. It wouldn't decriminalize cannabis in any way, shape, or form. It would cause total chaos in state programs. But we can't afford to wait for this drawn out bureaucratic process, the result of which we are completely unsure of. But the fact that Biden has called for this review is incredibly useful, because it is adding motivation for Congress to step in and do it more effectively. Cannabis was placed in Schedule 1 by Congress, and I think that it will ultimately be removed from the schedule entirely because through Congress.
Hey, so I just got a, whatever this is, I guess it would be a news article. I never know if it's a newspaper article or newsletter or it's a distribution press release, but it's still saying that the DEA will have the final word about what happens with the cannabis scheduling. And it's weird because the FDA is the one that seems to be leading the charge to make changes, but both of these little organizations, the bureaucratic organizations in our country are all saying, well, we need to do more research. They can't do research because they've already screwed that up already. So where do you think this, if you were the president or you were the czar of the world, Morgan, and you could say this is either a drug or a plant, therefore under the DEA or the agricultural world, where would it be most effective?
I think that's a very interesting question. We know that the FDA is not going to be able to effectively regulate cannabis as a plant. They can probably effectively regulate cannabinoid-derived or cannabinoid-based drugs. But really, when it comes down to it, there are a bunch of different agencies that are in charge of this. The DEA pretty much has final say, and they have structural inertia working against this. So I think it's very again, we're really going to have Congress step in and do this. And I'm hoping that the fact that Biden's announcement was met with overwhelming public approval across the political spectrum, with a few outliers like folks like Tom Cotton, will really help motivate Congress to address this issue and take it out of the DEA's hands, take it out of HHS's hands, and take it ultimately out of the FDA's hands, and then determine proper roles themselves for these federal agencies regarding cannabis and cannabinoid drugs and other substances going forward.
Yeah. The FDA couldn't even come out with regulations for CBD after the Farm Bill passed. So I'm not real confident that they're going to do anything here other than to muck up the whole process. Josh, I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's all right. I was going to ask if the recent news about Germany had any influence or any drive in making any of that happen faster.
I haven't heard any members of Congress really speaking about that.
Do they even know?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think that Congress is kind of a weird place. They lean on international developments when it suits their purposes, and then ignore them when it doesn't. So I think that it's difficult to tell what sort of impact Germany's impending legalization is going to have. Um, you know, one thing that I have been telling people for years is that the U.S. is in danger of being left behind in the international cannabis market, um, because of the continued intransigency of federal law and of Congress. And so, if we're worried about all of the various factors that go into making the United States a continued top player in global markets, this is one area where we could pretty easily stop the slow ebb of the rest of the world passing us by.
Is there any shot of a federal cannabis agency being created, and its only concern would be the hemp world and the THC cannabis world? Is there any hope for that? And is it actually would add another layer of bureaucracy to this whole issue?
Well, there's been a lot of discussion about that, and I think that it's possible. I'm not necessarily sure that it's wise. There would still be a lot of other agencies that would have some interaction with cannabis and cannabis policy and cannabis regulation. And we know that there are already systems in place and agencies in place that have experience dealing with this sort of thing. Whatever aspect of the regulatory structure or control that you're talking about, and creating new agencies is incredibly difficult. I mean, it's hard enough to get the ones that exist to do their jobs right. Adding new ones is a whole other, jar of snakes. Not to mention, like, once you actually get it created, then you actually have to get it up and running and get it make sure that it's effective. That can take years, and we don't really want to prolong the process that much. I think that what is probably most likely is that there might be a new department built off of an existing agency that is primarily concerned with the restorative justice components of any sort of descheduling and regulation bill. But I tend to think that it would be a lot easier and a lot quicker to just effectively define what roles existing agencies have in this process.
Yeah. And lastly, I just want to get your reaction to what was the reaction to President Biden saying that he was going to let out, 6,500 pardon 6,500 federally convicted possession or nonviolent cannabis criminals. And of course, the entire industry and everybody's writing articles about this doesn't affect anybody, right?
Well, I mean, the 6,500 people that are eligible for it would say otherwise.
Well, who are they? Because I have yet to hear anybody say, here's an example of someone who was pardoned. That's what I'm waiting to hear, because most people are saying this was window dressing. At least this is the scuttlebutt I got out of New York last week.
Well, Chris Goldstein, Normal's Northeast regional coordinator, is one of the people that would be directly impacted by that and is eligible for a pardon. Also, you have to think that these go back to 1992 and up until 5 years ago. So there are a lot of people that that this is going to impact. And just because they're not activists and not in the public limelight doesn't mean they don't exist, and doesn't mean that those charges haven't been hanging over their heads, negatively impacting their ability to live a normal life and reach their full potential.
No, but I think the argument though was that there's not a single person that's in there simply for possession. They had other things that they had with them. So intent to distribute, for example, isn't simply just a possession. So there's not a single person that's going to be affected by that law unless they expand it.
No, that's not the case. What you're talking about is incarceration. Now, there may or may not be anybody that's in federal prison for simple possession charges. I tend to think that there aren't, but the simple possession charges definitely do happen, and there's roughly 6,500 people that it will impact.
So just to
And while
clarify, because I think we're talking about two different things. One is the people that are still in prison, and one are the people that are out of prison. So you're saying the people that are out of prison can be affected, but no one in prison are going to. It's not going to help anybody.
Yeah, few, if any, people that are currently incarcerated will be directly impacted by this, other than to have that one charge pardoned. So and also the pardons actually only affect people who have been out of prison or out of supervised court release programs for at least 5 years up until the date of that announcement. So it doesn't really affect anybody that's in prison. But that is really kind of besides the point, because, admittedly, we do have to worry about the incarceration issue. But the collateral consequences of a cannabis conviction at the federal level are huge and go way beyond prison. We're talking about negatively impacting your ability to get education, employment, housing, medical care, everything from child custody issues to professional licensure. The collateral consequences of these criminal records are huge and can really just set people back for the rest of their lives in terms of limiting their potential to be productive and fully contributing members of society and reach their full potential. So, when people say, "Oh, this isn't letting anybody out of jail," I say, "Yeah, well, we're going to get to that." But right now, there are 6,500 people who are going to have an easier time going through life and being the best that they can be after these announcements, and those are real people.
And one of those I'm pretty sure I heard this right. Was it Goldstein, the Northeast director of Normal?
Yeah, he's definitely a person that is eligible for the pardon. I should point out as well that a pardon is not an expungement.
Right.
It doesn't actually clear your record. It just notes that like you have been pardoned on this date. But even that, that affects things like voting rights.
Right. Yeah, no, I get it. And by the way, you're the one who explained the difference, so I appreciate that. Hey, Morgan Fox, first of all, I'd love an intro to that guy, since you guys are in the same sandbox, basically, of Normal. I'd love to hear his story. I really would. I mean, me, I want to tell the stories of the industry. So tell him he's welcome anytime on our program here on a Friday afternoon, or even at a time that might be more convenient for him, because I really think the world needs to hear that there actually is someone out there who is positively affected by that announcement by the president. And look, even if it was window dressing, I lived to hear the day that the president of the United States recognized that the laws were not just for cannabis. And that was a huge win for the entire industry and anybody and all the advocates who are out there waving the flag and have been waving that flag for decades. So I'm not knocking anything. I'm just happy we're actually able to talk about it and continue to talk about it. And we will continue to talk about it, Morgan Fox, with you on the third Friday of every month. And I so appreciate your regularity with us. And we will be back in just a few minutes, and it would be me and Josh. And watch, we're going to juggle for 30 minutes. You're going to love this. It's going to be fun. Don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just... like every other night, just gonna lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car. I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean. I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Every night and day, we're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God. Thank God Jonathan Edwards is joining us live in the WSCA studios.
Welcome back to Green Rush Live, really live on a Friday afternoon here. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media and sometimes regular host of this program. I am always welcomed by and always happy to have in our room as a guest host is Josh Kincaid from Washington State, who covers the Washington beat, if you will, for our weekly Weed Talk news show, which will follow this really live talk show at 6 o'clock. Josh, unfortunately, we weren't able to get anybody committed to this half hour. We thought we had a few, but at the last minute, they all had issues. Let's just leave it at that. I'm not going to name names. But Josh, you were here. That much I really appreciate. Tell me, you said you've got something you'd like to discuss with me, a recent report you were looking at?
I do. I think there's a couple of things I wanted to address first. From the folks leaving comments. They wanted to know about interstate commerce and if that can happen, how that can happen. And the other one I think is going to have the same answer was about the Safe Banking Act and if companies will be able to be on a publicly traded exchange like NASDAQ, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Both answers are that the limitations are that there's a Schedule 1.
Right.
So like the last segment with Morgan, we mentioned that if they deschedule and it's not scheduled at all, that's great. Or if it's at least not Schedule 1, then there's other alternatives. But neither of those can really happen legally until that descheduling process happens. So,
and you and I both know that interstate commerce of cannabis in the United States of America has been going on for generations, illegally, right?
Jimmy, we could be making a fortune right now between arbitrage between the Seattle and the New York markets, for example, and Philly. You know, we could buy it really, really cheap here and sell it really, really expensive over there and make a killing. This is not legal.
Well, I think we just made a record of that now, so that probably wouldn't be a good thing to do, right? Right. And the other thing that I think is, again, kind of another reason why we have to have reform is the fact that flower may not be allowed to go legally across state lines, but the recipes for the manufacture of edibles, of tinctures, of other elements to titrate, to ingest into your body, that's happening because that's where all the celebrity brands are making their way from California over here in the East Coast to Massachusetts, where I'm located. So, I mean, to me, that's almost not fair.
Mhm.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, it's more expensive for these companies and the redundancies to have that. So they have to duplicate all of their standard operating procedures, the property, the plant, the equipment, the labor, everything. But that's the price of doing business right now. And so
Right.
a lot of these retailers are making money. The producers aren't. The processors, if separate from the retailers and they're not vertically integrated, they're all struggling. So if Oklahoma in March goes, we'll see a lot of those 7,500 plus licenses get eviscerated because once the scaling happens, a lot of those mom and pops won't be able to keep up.
You know, the subject of MSOs came up in a conversation with myself and Tori Chamberlain, who's our news producer of We Talk News, who, by the way, will be joining us at 5:30 this afternoon. And we will argue this because I will get behind the MSOs, especially during this time of the development of the industry. And by that, I mean, in order to keep the momentum going, you need somebody, big operators, to move this needle, move the federal cannabis reform forward, pay the lobbyists. I'm sorry, that happens in America. It's part of the deal. And I understand that most of the people that complain about the MSOs complain that their weed really sucks. Okay. For the most part, it's just not good. And craft cannabis, on the other hand, is so much better and a higher quality, if you will, than most of the mass-produced MSOs. Now, there are some out there now that are learning some of the secrets of making craft cannabis level flower at the mass production level for multi-state operators. But you know, Josh, what's your feeling about the MSOs? They're a target of every single person I talk to in this business.
They are. They're kind of like the Budweiser. They're the big guys out there. And I think they're always going to have a target out there because they have an unfair advantage having the capital in the organization. But I think everyone else had an ability to play a part in that if they wanted to. They chose not to, and this is just kind of this is how business works. Let's ask Doug Miller. Dougie Fresh, what do you think?
Hey, wait, is Doug with us? If it is, it's New Jersey at night because all I see is a dark screen. But we'll get to Doug. He's supposed to be here at 5 o'clock, which is fine. And
Right.
I know that he has an opinion about this because he has an opinion about just about everything. But I was at a very impressive investor summit in New York last week that was put together by ArcView. Now, ArcView is a fund that was started by Steve D'Angelo and Troy Dayton 10 years ago, was active for about 5 of those 10 years, kind of went off the rails a little bit, and now they're starting to rejigger themselves, if you will, and come back out to the market. And they had I thought it was a great conference. The quality of the people I met there, the investor groups that I was able to be introduced to and met there, it was pretty amazing to me as an outsider looking in at this point in time. There is money out there for investment for cannabis operators. You just may have to look for it harder, and you may have to work a little harder on finding out just how to approach them. But ArcView gave an opportunity for everybody to do that. And I want to congratulate Jeff Finkel and Gene Sullivan, 2 of the principals at ArcView, for really running a great show. And I really enjoyed it. Josh, what's your feeling? What's your read? And you're someone who can look at the tea leaves in the financial markets and actually see trending and that sort of thing. Are you starting to see more of the cannabis investment money being loosened up, or is everybody still more cautious, waiting for the midterms, waiting to see what happens with our inflation recession, which always seems to change every month?
Definitely more on the sidelines, and that kind of capital crunch that's been around for a couple of years is still there. A steep decline in that capital raise year to date when you compare it to last year, even still. So it's not getting any better. But some of the sectors that have historically been getting capital is cultivation and retail. So they're less than 2% of the equity that's raised year to date, according to Viridian Capital Advisors. That's compared to 52% last year. So that's happening for a couple of reasons. They think that MSOs have been able to use that equity in acquisitions. so they don't have to really come up with extra money. They just use their shares out of nowhere. Then you have tier one MSOs that have a strong capital position, so they have money, but they don't know what to do with it. And then you have a greater availability and better pricing of debt. So there's also FOMO. So you have investors that are willing to take anything, and debt is at the historic high. There's never been more debt issuance out there, and people, investors are taking it. So why not keep issuing it?
Right. And isn't debt the American way?
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not quite sure that I understand all that, but I definitely understand.
Bonds are debts, just as a reminder. So debt and equity.
That much I think I can understand. It was one of the first things that was asked of the 15 representatives of venture capitalist groups that were at the ArcView conference. Jamie Pearson was able to moderate this kind of a free-for-all in this big room, and I thought she did a great job. And the first question, I asked the first question because you know how it is at a press conference. Nobody wants to ask the first question. I can ask the first question because we had just talked about debt financing versus equity financing. And sure enough, that generated about 4 or 5 different comments from different people. And there was some discussion, which was better, which was, better than the other one. And I don't think that there is a cut and dry feeling about that. I think it depends on each deal. Yes.
Yeah, each deal, each segment, each region, they all have their own variables. And I think it's all kind of starting to normalize. For example, we're starting to see a lot less sales on 420. It's just becoming kind of a normal day because during the pandemic, a lot of retailers were issuing steep discounts. This store right next to me has 30% off 3 days a week. So what's the draw on 420? There really isn't one. So right now we're seeing a lot more sales during Thanksgiving and Christmas.
That's a normalization process right there. People party over the holidays, right?
Right. Yeah.
And they don't need to fake partying on 420, even though we all, wink, wink, that's a big holiday. I still had to explain it to some people down in New York too, where it all began and all that neat stuff. But that's another story.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that report that you mentioned earlier is a Headset report. It's called Analyzing U.S. Cannabis Sales Trends to Understand Holiday Demand. So it kind of goes over what to expect this Thanksgiving and Christmas and how that time period is really going to overtake sales, and has really over last year before, and probably will continue that. And so we can kind of get into some of those reasons about why that time period is going to create more sales and discounts, and what's the trending behind that, some of the analytics behind that as well.
And the other thing that I also took part in, actually there were 3 conferences that I took part in last week. Okay, one was the 6th annual Burns and Levinson State of the Cannabis Industry Conference. That was outside of Boston. Then the ArcView conference, and then, because I'm a glutton for punishment, driving from Brooklyn to Newark, New Jersey, which took me 3 hours to go about 13 miles, I think it is. Okay. Now, granted, I didn't leave until 4 o'clock, so I was screwed, basically. But each one of those conferences that I was at had a different flavor to it. And I found that kind of fascinating between the 3, whereas the Real Cannabis Entrepreneur event, and we're going to have 2 people that I met there on at the top of the hour with us. And I think you already mentioned Doug. Do you know him, by the way?
Not yet.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you're reading the fine print on the Zoom wall, which is 15 feet away from me, which means I can't see that. Okay. So I get it. Anyway, back to the impressions. The Real Cannabis Business Entrepreneur, run by Gary George, was really kind of a completely different element. New York and New Jersey are 2 different states from the New England area. You've got, now granted, Connecticut still gets kind of grandfathered into the tri-state area, but if you're in New England, the people Hartford is the middle city in the middle of Connecticut, and the people that are east of Hartford are Red Sox fans, and the ones that are west are Yankees fans. I mean, that's kind of the divider in Connecticut as far as the tri-state area. But I got to tell you, there is a lot of excitement in New York and New Jersey about what's to come. And even though they're still going through, both states are still going through their early stages of development, there's going to be huge opportunities down there, Josh.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because they have the benefit, I think, of being two of the bigger populated states getting into the game with the ability to look at what Massachusetts did, what Maine did, what Washington State did, what Colorado did. California is still trying to figure it out because Steve D'Angelo talked about how when they had just the medical program, that was working great.
Mm-hmm.
That was his words. It was working great. And then they brought in adult use, if you will, and it's totally mucked up all the regulations. And, he's, needless to say, was pretty down on that whole thing. So lessons learned, of all those lessons, Josh, and you've been sitting there looking at this now for a number of years. What do you think is the most important thing that a state can do as it starts a cannabis industry with regulations and compliance? What's the smartest thing that they should be doing?
I think they should be looking at some of the petri dish experiments like Washington and learning from them and realizing that some of the restrictions you were trying to place didn't have the outcomes you were anticipating, like not allowing for outside investment was going to somehow restrict diversion into the black market. And you can't really stop that. What you're doing is just limiting those license holders and small business owners and entrepreneurs the ability to get capital when their other abilities are restricted. So yeah, I would say just maybe, although it sounds crazy, just with the cafes I'm dealing with now, we're kind of restricted to this co-op or this membership model, which should just be open to the public, but they're not ready for it yet. So I hate the idea of saying, well, let's just pass the law and then wait for something to change. And then 10 years in Washington, and it hasn't changed. So it's hard for me to kind of be optimistic, but I wish the government would be more optimistic and allow those rules to just flow, because I think we're a lot more mature, and I don't think it's going to be as wild as they think.
Well, again, who knows? This is why we love this kind of open forum, because everybody has their own observations about what's going on in their home state. And this show always has people from different parts of the country. In fact, I can see one in here from Washington State. Medical was great too. So the medical program that was instituted by Washington State has Miggy's approval.
Yeah, I mean, Washington State had a really good medical program. A lot of states could have learned a lot from that. There was great access, availability, pricing, consistency. My medical provider that I had for a long time left for Arizona, and now I'm left with inconsistency and strains changing and all that stuff. So Washington had a great medical program. People could have learned a lot from that.
Is it a drug or a plant, Josh?
Is it a drug or a plant? Wow, that's deep. I'd say yes. Yes, because it comes, it's like chicken or the egg. I think it's a plant that's definitely, once you start isolating cannabinoids and then the pharmaceutical industry gets a hold of it, it definitely, Marinol sucks. I don't think Marinol is anything close to cannabis. A friend of mine took that for his MS when he was still alive. And it didn't do anything for him except make him pass out. But I think true derivatives of cannabinoids will be medicine.
Yeah. And again, go ahead.
I was going to say is medicine as a drug, like that. I think it's a drug there. I mean, if you're talking about dependency versus addiction, that's a completely different subject.
A completely different subject. And it's one that I've asked many addiction experts about. And, the biggest question as Dr. Peter Grinspoon reminded me again, that's a discussion in every psychology medical school in the world. What is the line between addiction and dependency. And if you're dependent on something that actually has healthy benefits for you, is that an addiction, or is that you're just taking a vitamin that's in kind of, again, this is a very delicate subject, but I'm of the opinion, and I say it every time we close out these shows, is learn about it and use it responsibly.
Mhm.
Because in small regulated doses, and of course, look, I take about 1,000 milligrams of CBD a day, all right, just to get my inflammation somewhat manageable with my arthritis. But that's called a therapeutic dose. Now, you have a friend who had MS, Josh. So they're looking for even more potency, even more of milligrams in their system. I know people who function on 100 milligrams of THC cannabis every day.
Mhm.
So
Well, I think that's the difference. Is it can you still function, or does it limit your ability to get things done? Like, I'm studying for an investment license. I can't use THC during the day, but I definitely want to. I definitely want to use cannabis, THC, I should say, because CBD doesn't. I don't have that full entourage effect.
yeah, interesting. Again, everybody's. This is the thing about this particular plant medicine, is it impacts people differently, and what might work for you and give you a kind of a sedative effect would maybe give me more focus, and that therein lies. And medicine, they want it to be
So,
science.
Jimmy, we're on the same page here, but because I don't have access to the right particular cultivar to give me that focus that I know is out there, I'm stuck. I just went and got, it was a 6-year anniversary at a shop, 50% off. So I'm like, oh, I'll get this $200 ounce I've never tried for $100. It's like the worst thing I've ever tried. I have had $30 ounces that were better than that garbage. So whoever's growing that, it was trash, but
Yeah.
if I could get the same thing over and over, I could definitely get that, euphoric, uplifting, energetic focus from a Blue Dream circa 2015 or even before that. But it's not available, consistently. So how do you get something that that you really want, like a Matanuska Thunderfuck or something like that?
By the way, I think I actually tasted 2015 Blue Dream and found it to be exceptional. I got it in
Great.
California,
It was great.
but
Yeah.
it's not the same as the Blue Dream that I get here in Massachusetts. I can tell you that right now. It's just
Right.
not, even though they come from the same cultivar. And how do we know as consumers, really, is this really what that is? I mean, maybe you can
Yeah.
tell. There are a lot of connoisseurs out there, ganjiers, right? Ganjiers, the experts, who can smell a bud. And I'd love to see this, by the way. Blind smell test, here are the 5 cultivars, blind smell test. Who can tell which one is which just by the smell? And
Yeah.
you and I both know there are people out there that can do this.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw one the other day where it was like, Coke Zero, Coke Vanilla, Pepsi, and something else. And like people got all 5 of them right. And I'm like, man, shame on you for getting all those right.
Yeah,
But it would be
really.
great at the same time if it was cannabis and somebody could get all 5 of those right. Then it'd be high-fiving them like, hey,
That's
nicely
right.
done.
And there's nothing better than the original Coke recipe. I'm sorry.
Coke Cherry was another one, by the way.
Yeah, but that was a made for TV Coca-Cola. That's the way I look at that one. That's the way I look at that one. I'm just talking about the original recipe that has been tried to be
Oh, with Coke in it?
Of Coke, right? Well,
cocaine?
I didn't actually add that in, but yes, that yeah,
You're
that's
not that
part
old?
of it, isn't it?
I thought you were that old, Jimmy. My bad.
I am that old. Yes, I am. Hey, speaking of which, we've got a couple of guests that I met from New Jersey that are due to come on in a few minutes with us. And we'll be talking a little bit about that market. And also, I want to get into the Delta 8 discussion, because now everybody who's out there who is using Delta 8, and this is basically just people I talk to at these various conferences, understand that Delta 8 will get you high.
Mhm.
And again, while the big picture, everybody wants to know what they put in their body and what they, and it's been tested so that when you go, you can get some kind of a consistent product. this is why we have a legal movement going on. At least that is the utopian goal, right? Reality is completely different. And we're going to talk more about reality and get into the New Jersey scene in just a few minutes. Don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
So the reality of the matter is, big banks and small banks are going to be different in a lot of ways. And they're both going to have their advantages and disadvantages. For a business like cannabis, you really have to have an integral knowledge of that business and a real granular knowledge of that business and the players involved in it. And that's why if you look at the banks that are successful to play in this space in Massachusetts, they are smaller banks that are very heavy, intensified personal touch, human communication, where you don't get a lot of that with the bigger banks.
It's the whole package. Not only is it the exclusion, we talked earlier about how experienced is the rep you're talking with. Do they do it full time? Do they do it 5% of the time? Do they have a dedicated back office? How long they've been doing it? There's a lot of people trying to cash in the insurance. The forefathers, like my company, we've been doing it for 3 years and now they're trying to cash in. It's okay. We like competition, but we know that we're going to come out on top most of the time.
Hi, everyone. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young, and you're probably wondering, what am I doing on a growing show? After all, I'm a convicted plant killer. That's why I surround myself with these beautiful plastic babies. But now I have found the secret to all those people out there who just don't want to deal with growing a plant indoors or outdoors. You just don't have enough confidence. Hey, check out greengoddesssupply.com. That's where you'll find the Armoire system. Basically, it's growing for dummies like me. Check it out. The Armoire at greengoddesssupply.com. We've got breaking news for all farmers and growers out there. How would you like to defer the taxes you pay on your grow? Now you can legally, thanks to a discovery by agricultural tax attorney Michael Berwick of the law firm Greenspoon Martyr.
I have been working with tax deferral for 20 years, and my team at Greenspoon Martyr in the tax area got together with our team in the cannabis area. And putting our heads together collectively, we have determined that this major tax deferral clause includes the growing of cannabis.
Now, don't think that this is a new tax code clause, because it's been around for over a century.
Absolutely. This provision's been around for over 100 years. It applies. It was designed for agriculture. It was put in force at a time when we had a much more agrarian economy, big lobby for agriculture and farming, and that definition of agriculture has grown and expanded over the years. And again, it now includes cannabis.
How does it work?
Essentially, it will allow the taxpayer, if done correctly through us, it will allow the taxpayer to defer all state and federal ordinary income taxes for 30 years.
To find out more and see if you qualify as a grower, contact Michael Berwick at 305-789-2761 or call toll-free 888-491-1120 and ask for Michael Berwick's office, or just email him at michael.berwick, that's BURWICK at gmlaw.com. All right, welcome back to the second hour of Green Rush Live here at the world headquarters of Pro Cannabis Media, Clinton, Massachusetts. And if you don't know where Clinton is, just ask Google. It's in Massachusetts. It's a long way away from where Josh is talking to us. And now we're going to bring in Doug Miller from New Jersey as well. Hello, Doug. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you today?
Very good. Tell us a little bit about your adventures in cannabis in New Jersey, because as I continue to chit chat with you, I find out more and more. And to me, the most impressive thing is you're an accomplished chef.
Yeah, I went to culinary school right after high school. I graduated from the Philadelphia Restaurant School. My last chef job, I was fortunate. I worked for the NFL. I used to be a chef for all the talent that does all the TV shows, and that was the job that I said, you know what, this is an awesome chef job, and I'm gonna make it my last one, and I'm never gonna clock in and out of another like job again. And I stuck to my word. So it's been great. But yeah, I was a chef for over a decade, and I worked at some nice places and exclusive country clubs, the NFL. So I had fun.
Now, are we ready to do infused cooking, Doug?
Well, I've been doing infused cooking well over 20 years, so it's just comes natural to me. I was making brownies 20 years ago, and then how I really got into the cannabis industry big is unfortunately my mom had colon cancer, and she was actually one of the first 100 patients in New Jersey with the cannabis license back then in 2015-16, right when it started. The dispensary was right around the corner from my house. There was just one. It was Compassionate Science. Now it's called Cure Relief, and there's tons of them everywhere. But I had the caregiver card very early, so I knew all the recreational laws and or the medicinal laws and everything. And I was making my mom's food with butter, obviously, and it did help. She would tell the doctors it was the only thing that helped, and she was pretty much anti-cannabis her whole life. Never drank. Was very healthy. She had Crohn's really bad, and it just developed in the colon cancer. And unfortunately, she passed. And then after she passed, I said, you know, it really helped her big time. So let me take it to the next level. And I started messing with extractions and other things. And I've gone on. I made an oil that stops seizures. So I work with doctors all over the country, and I'm more than happy to send it to anybody. It's just something that helps, and it's awesome that it even works. So I've been doing a lot of different things, and I just love the industry inside and out.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is amazing. The people that you meet at these trade shows. And Josh, by the way, is going to MJ BizCon in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks. And I wrote my dear Chris letter today and told him that I would not be making the trek to Vegas this year. And I'm disappointed, but I will get to see my son and still teach my class. And it's that Wednesday that if I could just snap my fingers and show up there and then snap my fingers and get back, that would be great. It ain't going to happen. There's no snapping of the fingers anymore because of my fingers.
You wrote the wrong person. You wrote Chris Walsh instead of Chris Kringle.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And there is a difference. I know there is a difference, right? Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Doug, I want to get back to the cannabis in New Jersey world.
Sure.
Okay? It's now legal to have adult use and adult use dispensaries in New Jersey. How vibrant is the market? How competitive is it to get those licenses? And are you starting to see some more normalization of acceptance of the product in your backyard?
So I'll answer the last question first. Definitely starting to get more acceptance. I mean, we have Cure Relief is sponsoring sports teams in town, and pretty much everybody around is just perfectly fine with it as long as you're not really consuming in front of children, which you shouldn't be anyway. And yeah, so it's definitely way more relaxed. As far as competition, we have dispensaries popping up all over. Obviously, the big money corporations had the first dips at them because they had the money. It costs a lot, but people are starting to get into it a lot more. There's a couple of dispensaries that's open up. Actually, the town next to me just had a meeting last night, their zoning meeting, to have 2 more dispensaries. So they are popping up all around. And as soon as that happens, places like Cure Relief, because I don't want to talk bad, but their product isn't the greatest. They've actually been, it's funny, in New Jersey, they don't really hold anybody to standards. If the state comes in and you're in violation, they just tell you to correct it. they've been in violation over a dozen times for selling moldy product, and they just can't get it right. And the problem is there, and I explained it from day one. And it's very busy. I live around the corner. There's a line around the door, and it's a corporation. They're more worried about turning over the money, and they do have a very fast turnover. And it's funny, it's called cure relief, and they totally don't cure it properly. It's the one thing that they do not do, and it leads to major issues. And yeah, it is what it is. But they're either going to have to get their act together real soon, or they're going to get phased out, even though they're very big. But people will stop going because their flower is just not up to par, to be honest.
Josh,
And yet, I was gonna say, and yet people line out the door in
That's
Florida
right.
for cookies that sells more in one store than the entire rest of the state for flour that I had in Nevada that was trash. I bought like an $80 blunt, and it was garbage. And people are just going because of the brand. And so, yes and no. I think it kind of depends on if the brand can pull people in. There was a $30 ounce I bought on 420. I opened it up and I thought it was moldy, and I pulled out a microscope and it was spider mites. So that's still happening in Washington State. It's gonna happen in other places. It's ridiculous. And eventually, I think the only thing that's gonna really, weed these people out is legalization. I think they're gonna stick around until they are truly forced out of business.
No, I can't disagree with that either, because they make so much money. Well, the money part, honestly, it depends, because like Cureleaf has multiple buildings, but people don't understand the cost of the operation. So you're talking a big corporation, and if they really wanted to do it right, they would cure it right. They would have a whole building just for curing and that whole process. But clearly, the money is more important than the patients, and they make that choice. And I think as we go down the road and better places pop up and you have way more options and the price comes down a little bit, I think they either have to get it back together or they'll get phased out. But right now, like I said, they just kill it because of the location where it's at. They were one of the first, and they just have a big operation going on, so they can handle tons of people.
Mhm.
There's no home grow in New Jersey yet, correct?
No, no, you can't do anything like that.
And and uh what kind of standards or regulation? You said they come in, they inspect, and they just tell you, hey, get it right. They're not being fined, right?
Yeah, it's quite crazy. No, in New Jersey and a lot of the states, they just write these regulations and things, and no one really follows anything. It's just like if they want to fine them, they can. But around here, they just tell them like, "Hey, you're not supposed to do that," and then they just do it again because nobody's really implementing anything. There's really no border. Like you heard Tara Masu. I mean, she even spoke at the convention, and she does a lot of great things in New Jersey. She was one of the first people. She helped write the regulations, and you heard her even say it. It's terrible. It's terrible. They need to get it up to date, and they really need people that understand, like herself. But they need more people like that can really get it together and make it right. Where that the industry cracks down on these things and really does real testing, because it's so crazy. If you can send the same product out to three different labs, you'll get three different results depending on what machines they use. So it's just very, it's a gray area in a big market. So
That
it,
and I'm guessing that the legacy market is flourishing then in New Jersey.
oh yeah, it just definitely, I mean, the
So how
industry's
does somebody
crazy.
compete with a legal product versus the fact that if they know the legal product is produced by this group over here and the illegal product is produced by these guys over here, and it's less expensive and it doesn't have mold on it?
Uh,
To me,
Honestly, the underground market is just as big, if not bigger, than the recreational dispensary market. For that reason, the prices are crazy. It's like $60 for an eighth. They want to charge you like $60 for a half a gram for a cartridge. It's not even that great, and it's just crazy what they do. And of course, people go there because it's convenient or it's fun to go to a dispensary. But at the end of the day, you can't go spending $60 for an eighth, and it's not that great. You're going to find it for $40, and and it's better. It's crazy. But like I said, as places start popping up, the dispensaries will get it together and grow better product, and the prices will come down. It's just so new right now that it's just one of them things that happened in California and Colorado in the beginning. You know, you walked in and the prices are expensive, and now you go out there and they're practically giving it to you. It's crazy. So it's just
but
one of them things.
But you guys are both numbers guys, okay?
Mhm.
This is not something, those numbers go right over the top of my head. But what we're watching is the open market, right? We're looking at supply and demand, and then legal and illegal.
Mhm.
And I have never found, look, if you've been using cannabis for 30 or 40 years, whether it's legal or not was never the thing that made you afraid to do it, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. You were doing it regardless. I honestly been using since I was 15. It was the only thing I realized that helped my allergies immediately. I never wasn't a big drinker. I still don't drink ever. And I just don't like alcohol. It makes you feel like crap the next morning. You know, you're not productive and you're not in control. You're not getting in your car and driving home safely. So I just never liked it. And like I said, the cannabis helped my allergies. So I was like, wow, this is amazing. And yeah, I've never stopped. My whole thing when I was younger, I was like, man, am I gonna have to stop this when I get older at some point and grow up? And then it started to become legal, and I was like, this is so great. Like, this is the
No, you
perfect
got to
time.
find a cannabis lounge or a cannabis cafe to start working at being a chef. Having the black market proliferate as much as it is, that a home grow, I'm assuming, as strong as it is, are they going to be able to go into a cannabis cafe and spark their own, or is it going to be this thing where you got to go to Curaleaf and buy theirs and go to their cafe? Are you keeping track of the cannabis cafe bills and how that's going to roll out?
Yeah, they're supposed to try to open one in Atlantic City. They're trying to thrive the cannabis industry just because the casino industry down there is just really hurt and they need money. They need any kind of income they can
It's
get. So
funny
they're
because in Vegas they kick you out if you're smoking the blunts or whatever.
well, you can't go inside the casino, but the town itself is welcoming as much cannabis activity. So they're trying to open a lounge down there. And as far as being strict about where you get your cannabis, no one really cares. You just basically pay whatever your cover is to get in, and you're gonna consume, buy there, do whatever, and it is what it is. But
Mhm.
yeah, I don't think they're gonna be that concerned with where you exactly purchase it. No one really pays no mind. I mean, I have the medical card and nobody asks anything. It really.
Are they pretty open in New Jersey in terms of how you're going to make revenue? Because in Washington State, we've been fighting this uphill battle on trying to get that. And there's been, lobbyists at like every step of the way, like anti-lobbyists, and then the indoor smoking lobbyists, impaired driving or whatever, all these issues. But then when you get beyond regulatory stuff, you run into like standard business issues, like how do you make money? Like normal stuff. So we were going to do the not co-op model, but a membership model. It's a lot more conservative, and that would just kind of open the doors. But Colorado, other places, they wanted to just kind of the standard, like just business license model where you're just like a regular business, and kind of the Dutch coffee shop model where it's just social use, come in, do your thing, rather than this temporary license. It's a pop-up, you're here, you're gone, or for tourism, these are for locals, kind of the heart and soul of the community. By looking at these coffee shops and how benign they are, will kind of really just allow for a lot more movement, I think. Where are you seeing the cannabis cafes? What's going to be your involvement, and how can people make money?
Hey, we were at a cannabis cafe
Sorry to
that
break
night, that Saturday night, at least, maybe not an official one, right?
Exactly. But and I think you're gonna start seeing them popping up and cannabis type parties. I mean, Kim is has the 420 friendly rental house thing. I can't even think of what they're called, but she has that going on. Kim B. I mean, you just see so many other things rolling out in the cannabis industry and just expanding. And I always say to people doing it for a while, everyone just wants to have a dispensary. They seem like the dispensary is like the end all be all. And to me, that was like the one thing I never wanted to have. It seems like there's so many regulations, laws, headaches, this, that. Yeah, they make money and it's great. There's a million ways to make actual money in the industry if you're smart about it. And you were saying that before, like Josh, how do people make money? And yeah, it's a very flooded industry, and people think they're going to walk in the industry and just make millions because it's $1 billion industry, and they don't understand. It's cutthroat. You have to make a lot of connections. You have to get out there and talk to people, be at the conventions, and really, really. I mean, it's one of the industries like you really have to be out there hardcore. It is. It's a new industry. There's a lot of opportunity, but it's a very tough industry. And people don't understand that. And there's a lot of overhead because of all your licensings and regulations. And every time you turn around, they're hitting you with a fee for this, fee for that. It's just crazy. You know what I mean? They want to inspect this, and it just gets crazy. So
I
Yeah.
hope I apologize if you guys just heard a Harley Davidson go by my apartment. It's okay if you didn't. The largest and oldest legacy operator in the town that I'm in is my next door neighbor, and he drives a Harley. I'm not going to name names here, but he's a great guy. All right, let's just say that. The Cannabis Cafe, guys, and Josh, you mentioned Las Vegas. I do not believe that they are going to be operational in time for MJ BizCon in a couple of weeks. Am I right?
They're open. They have the new Woo, I think, has been open for a couple of years, as a matter of fact. But even before, it was like, I don't know what the rules or regulations were, but now that it's open, there's at least 3 that I'm going to go and visit during MJ BizCon and do a little review on it.
Cool. Have you been to Planet 13?
Yes.
Yeah, that's quite the experience. So let's just say, and Doug, have you ever been out to MJ BizCon?
I have not been out there actually, and I was supposed to go multiple times, and every time I'm supposed to go, something pops up where I have to go somewhere else. But it is what it is, and I'll definitely get out there because I know it's a great time.
It's overwhelming in many ways, but it certainly it is everything that the show Friday and Saturday was to the probably 100th degree.
I was gonna say times a million, maybe.
Well, yeah, close, somewhere in between 100 and a million. Okay,
Yeah.
how's that?
But no, it's just that atmosphere out there, and every show out there is like the Champ Show. You could break that Champ Show up into 2 different conventions because you just can't possibly even go through everybody. It's just insane. It's huge.
Can we talk a little bit about the Curate product?
Sure.
Because I know we actually have some B-roll that I shared with Dan that kind of had that booth that your products were at. Can we talk a little bit about how that is? And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to talk to Mimi, but
that's all right. I can speak for her.
I know you can. I know you can. Tell me about that product, though.
So Curate, we developed, I'll tell you a long story short, how me and Mimi even began to meet. Now, Mimi actually has the very first trademark in the country for CBD. She was awarded for her Feeling Fine, Fabulous, her products, her healthcare line. And we basically did the white label for Be Relaxed. We did all that for them, and that's who we were helping out at the show that you saw, and we also had our products. And she's been in the industry forever, and she started out in the vape industry, and she was white labeling for some of the biggest companies that do the nicotine vape throughout the country and the world. And so then that industry completely fell apart in New Jersey, and we had to pivot, and we had this opportunity. We actually looked into starting a testing lab, and because we have a state certified lab, it's one of the only ones in New Jersey. And
but are they enforcing what they find in those labs?
No, you don't even need it. We realized that we didn't even need the lab to make anything. So we have this beautiful lab that's set up, and it's all good. We know everything's safe, so it's fine with us, and we have the ability to just make whatever we want. And people, and when you do white labeling, people like to know that it's a nice, clean, safe lab, so it's not coming out of our kitchen, so that's a big benefit. But so we were we were going to try to set up a testing lab, and then in New Jersey, the laws just kept getting pushed back here, there, everywhere, and we were like, we're not going to invest all this money in the equipment and only be able to test hemp for like the next 3 years. It's probably not going to be profitable, so we held back on that, and that's when we had the opportunity when D8, D10 started hitting the market. We said, hey, let's make a company. There's no reason why not. And so we were already pretty much doing everything that, for other companies. So we had the ability, and then we just created that and just took it off running. We do all the trade shows, but our whole thing with the Curate is we try to make everything a medicinal purpose. Again, we try to make the most high quality product, and it has to have a medicinal purpose. That's what we're all about, and just helping people. So, and Mimi got into the vape industry to help people with cigarettes. So, and ended up having to pivot into CBD, and and she's made it work. I'll tell you what, she's one of the only vape shops, and now we made a health and wellness. We have a cafe, a cannabis corner. We have everything in that store, and completely made it a health and wellness shop. And because a vape shop just doesn't work in New Jersey anymore. And but yeah, it's a beautiful building. It's an old bank from the 1900s. It's huge. It's 5,000 square foot retail shop. It's gorgeous.
That's
In Riverside, New Jersey. But yeah, so that's how we got into everything. So the Curate, and then so the D8, the D10, THCO and HHC products, they were legal in New Jersey, so we just started producing them, and then we went as far as producing the battery that we use, our disposable cartridge. We changed all the air holes and the coils for each different distillate, and we made a no choke. And that's Mimi's a genius when it comes to that stuff. She loves the vape industry and just knows it inside and out. And literally, you can take our cartridge, and we do it at the conventions all the time. I tell people, I open up a brand new one, hand them, and they pull as hard as you can, and you just blow out this beautiful smooth cloud, and people look at you like, yo, that's wild, that's never happened. And it took a lot of like experimenting, but we figured it out. And a lot of people try to white label them, but we refuse to do it just because the batteries are so hard to get now. If we had access to so much more product, it would be easier, but the material is just so limited anymore that we're not going to jeopardize not having material for us to do it for other big companies. So we do have the best battery, I can promise you that.
Is it a ceramic? Is it like I know that the Jupiter C cell was like the state of the art for the vape industry, and then until the entire vape world kind of came to a halt there for a while because people were doing it the wrong way, and it was a shame what was going on with that. But this is what's going to happen with the new industries, that they're going to be people that are always looking to cut corners. This is human nature, right? It's just that's because Delta 8 exists for a reason, right?
It's called greed, and greed is always going to be there. So just know that there's always people that are going to be taking shortcuts, like you said, and trying to just make product to put it out there as fast as possible to try to make a profit. And yeah, you have to just pay attention. Consumer beware. You really have to do your research on products and know what you're buying. I mean, if you're going to a gas station and that's like your main supply, you're probably not getting the greatest product. You know what I mean? So it's just, you just have to know. And I know plenty of people that's where they go. It's cheaper. And I tell them like, hey, there's a product for everybody. There's a high end product and a low end product, and that's why companies make them both.
Was that a knock on Florida getting their weed from gas stations?
That's too funny. Yeah, they just passed that. They're going to start opening dispensaries or selling weed in gas stations.
Circle K.
That's Circle. Yeah, Circles. That's what it's called. Circle K. I knew it was a Circle something. That's too funny. When does that start? It starts pretty soon, or next year. When does it start?
I don't know. It's gonna be pretty wild though. Like
It is.
that's a huge distribution.
That's crazy. Going to get gas and then being able to just roll in. And
I think
grab
that's
buds.
huge. Like CBD, like I've worked with or I've spoken with ex NFL players, and they've gotten into like the Walgreens, Rite Aid. They have the name, whatever, but they have the money, but they don't have the distribution. And I think it's seriously lacking in terms of priorities and how high it needs to be and how much of an impact it can have on your bottom line. And being in that series of product SKUs for Circle K can make or break a company.
Absolutely. And like you said, a company has to be set up that they can just produce quality product and tons of it for something like that. Because if not, your product starts going down, they're going to drop you quick when people start buying it because your product quality is just a little less than it used to be because you're trying to make up the quality and distribute, and the quantity. And they're going to have to be very careful with but it's going to make it's going to make some companies huge, and they're going to do it right because they know the bottom line and the end of the road is going to be very, very prosperous.
Do you know the way that it's manufactured, though? I've had some concerns about the THCO acetate and the Delta 9 and some of the acids and the way that it's washed. And we would talk about health and wellness and everything, and yet there's these methods that aren't necessarily ideal. Can you walk us through that?
I do understand the process. Our product, we deal with a lab out west, and it's just one lab that we deal with. We make sure we have the testing of the product when it comes in house, and then we test everything ourselves. Then we make our product, and then we test it again, just to make sure that everything is just what it said it was, what the company told us our distillate was to begin with, and then when our end result, because once you start making it and mixing it and heating it up, it just becomes a different element. So you have to make sure you're consistent and you still have that same distillate that you had when you brought it in the door after you made your product. So we test it 3 times before it gets out the door. And but as far as like the whole process, I don't know the entire process. I don't want to tell you something wrong. I understand it all right, but it's a pretty detailed process, and I just know that some companies can get it down right where when you get the product tested, there's almost no trace of anything in it. And then I've seen companies that you get it and we haven't used the distillate we had it tested prior to using it, and they told us it was something else and it was a quality and it wasn't, and we weren't able to use it. So it happens. I mean, and so yeah, I don't know exactly the full process, but absolutely, some companies are way better at making it perfect than others, and I'm
Where
sure it costs more money and time to make it better.
where are the buyers coming from? Because you have an online platform, right? They're able to go in there and buy it. Are they domestic? Are they international? Like where's the buyers coming from?
Well, we have, like I said, we have a retail shop, so we have foot traffic that generates there, and then we do all the conventions. So we're working with distribution as well, distributors. So we do get some online, but we do a lot of distribution as well. So we have traffic coming every which way. And
All right. Hey,
yeah.
look, hey, Doug, this has been great because I love hearing what it's like in new states around the country. Every state is different. There's the little scuttlebutt in the room. Penny from, I'm not quite sure she's from Michigan, but she said, doesn't need testing. We don't need testing. We were doing legacy consumption for years. We don't need any more time. And I can't agree with her because that actually makes me feel better when I walk into a dispensary, know that it's been tested and I know what I'm going to get. And I know that it's not going to have any mold in it because it is inspected. Or if there is a little mold in it, you can't find it. That's what I'm saying. But again,
Well,
I'm talking from a medical dispensary card holder in Massachusetts.
Well, the other big thing with cannabis plant is when you grow it, it tends to suck up in the roots all the heavy metals in the soil. I know out west, a lot of wineries now rotate their crops with hemp to actually extract all the heavy metals and the contaminants in their soil and then go back to their grapes. So you also have to be careful of the contaminants in that nature as well. There's contaminants everywhere, and then you have growers that spray it with whatever insect repellents and this. It's just so crazy. You just never know. So Yeah, I mean, I believe in the testing. Like I said, sometimes you can send the same product to 3 different labs and get 3 different results. I like them to be pretty close to each other. If one's like way out in left field, I'm getting that product tested 3 more times because I want to know what's going on. But generally, they're all pretty much in the same ballpark. But like I said, you'll get different results, and it's wild. But I do like the testing because I do want to know what's in it as much as
Exactly.
possible. Anyway.
Exactly. Hey, Doug Miller, thank you so much for showing up today and
pleasure.
joining us. You're welcome any old time. And we're going to take our break here. And then on the other side, we're going to be joined by two media people. And we're going to talk about how media looks at the cannabis industry. So don't go away. Green Rush Live continues after this.
It's the whole package. Not only is it the exclusion, we talked earlier about how, how experienced is your rep you're talking with. Do they do it full time? Do they do it 5% of the time? Do they have a dedicated back office? How long they've been doing it? There's a lot of people trying to cash in the insurance. The forefathers, like my company, we've been doing it for 3 years and now they're trying to cash in. It's okay. We like competition, but we know that we're going to come out on top most of the time.
So the reality of the matter is, big banks and small banks are going to be different in a lot of ways, and they're both going to have their advantages and disadvantages. For a business like cannabis, you really have to have an integral knowledge of that business and a real granular knowledge of that business and the players involved in it. And that's why if you look at the banks that are successful to play in this space in Massachusetts, they are smaller banks that are very heavy, intensified personal touch, human communication, where you don't get a lot of that with the bigger banks.
As a broker, we have access to many, many cannabis carriers. So I will go in with 2 or 3 quotes for people. The quotes might be $20,000 for one, $22,000 for another, $17,500 for another. Pretty close among the 3. What I tell people is it's not the pricing, it's what's included and not included, meaning exclusions. An exclusion in layman's terms is just something that's not included. It's not on the menu. So it's just not included. But if you don't know that, if no one shows you that on page 71 of a 150-page policy, you're not going to know. No one knows. I never met one person that says they read an insurance policy. If you do, I got some property in Florida for you.
Hi, everyone. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young, and you're probably wondering, what am I doing on a growing show? After all, I'm a convicted plant killer. That's why I surround myself with these beautiful plastic babies. But now I have found the secret to all those people out there who just don't want to deal with growing a plant indoors or outdoors. You just don't have enough confidence. Hey, check out greengoddesssupply.com. That's where you'll find the armoire system. Basically, it's growing for dummies like me. Check it out. The Armoire at greengoddesssupply.com. And welcome back to the final half hour of Green Rush Live, our regularly scheduled Business of Cannabis talk show here at Pro Cannabis Media, now located in the world headquarters in Clinton, Massachusetts. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and I'm joined this week again by Josh Kincaid, the host of the Talking Hedge out of Washington State, and someone who is going to MJ BizCon in a few weeks. And our two guests for the final half hour is Chris Ferrone from Dig Boston. He produces the Talking Joints memo. And Tori Chamberlain, who is a news producer of Weed Talk News, I might add. And I believe she also anchored this week's Weed Talk News. So she is one of multi-talents, and we're so happy to have both of them on our program today. Chris, I'm going to start with you. and ask you a direct question about a story that broke really a few weeks ago about an incident that happened back in January in a True Leaf factory. I know you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you how, if you know how that all came about. How did, I think it was Mike Crawford who broke that story.
Yeah, I mean, Mike broke it, for the Young Jerks, of course. So, it was on a podcast, and luckily, fortunately, Mike is, also vocal, so he also and active on social media. So, there's not that this is obviously a huge scoop, but there's a lot of big stories that are said on podcasts, right? That, and Jimmy, we talk about this, that don't always get pulled out of the ether, right? Well, Mike made sure to drill this one home, and of course, it turned out that it happened, literally nearly a year ago, 9 months earlier. And Mike has, who of course worked with the Dig a lot over the years, also does his diligence, so had the receipts, as we like to say. And I got to, listen, this one is so egregious, so I don't want to somebody died, right? This is a major deal. Of course there are, though, where there's smoke, there's often fire, as we're seeing now in follow-up coverage by much bigger outlets than Mike's podcast. But there's a lot of stories brewing like this. Hey man, I'm here reviewing joints these days. You know what I mean? We do my investigative muscle is largely in prisons and stuff like that on the Dig side. But this is intrepid reporting, however you look at it. And but for any reporters out there looking to do this kind of digging, there's reports, and that's why things can happen a long time ago. And OSHA reports and other regulatory and also even municipal correspondence. It takes some time for that stuff to be in the pipeline. And sure, if somebody had known about this story and not jumped on it, they could have gotten scooped. But it's also something that if you wait a little bit and if it's happening, it's something that you can really get the paperwork. CCC is awfully transparent, particularly for Massachusetts, which is not a transparent state. It's awful states are much more transparent. Like Florida has, remarkable sunshine laws. Massachusetts, not so much, but cannabis is really well regulated. The fact that we can, see sales numbers and stuff like that is, and I'll also go to add that, I've covered the alcohol, ABCC, the Alcohol Commission, for years. It was never like this. So this is really new. So my point is this, I am at least glad that, if you're going to look for some silver lining, it's that, first of all, the story was uncovered. Second of all, that there's, that there's paperwork to follow up and that people are all over it. It's a huge national story.
Hey, I got to ask our local producer here. Tori, I got to ask, I don't know if this is true or not, but I know in your vocation, there usually is monitoring of the other stations. Did anybody in Boston run with this story at all?
A few actually. I want to give credit to NBC 10's investigative team. Their new executive investigative producer, I believe her name's Kathy, and I'm blanking on her last name. I feel so bad. I'm sorry. But Kathy did some great work where she reached out to a lot of Lorna's family and loved ones and interviewed them and tried to get their side of the story, as well as I saw a screenshot of an email that she had sent to the Cannabis Control Commission requesting several documents. And the commission's response was something pursuant to, Massachusetts current law, that there were certain documents they could not release particularly about what the commission was investigating about True Leave dating back to last fall. The commission says that pursuant to, whatever this law is, that they quoted in this response that they could not release these documents because of the investigation being ongoing. So that's a tough spot to be as a journalist. I'll tell you guys, I haven't told anyone else this except for Mike Crawford, but I just got documents back for my own FOIA requests that I sent to the Holyoke Police Department, and I have some records now in my possession. And it's just a matter of verifying things, verifying dates that have happened. The records I looked into were how many times an ambulance has been called to that facility since August of last year. I don't know that number off the top of my head, but it's certainly more than the 2 times it was called for Lorna McMurray. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
So it's just a tough spot to be as a journalist because you can only get whatever information the law will get you and whatever people are willing to say. So
That's some
that's
really
all
good,
you can do.
that's some really solid reporting, by the way. I just want to say all those FOIA angles, way to go. And but I also just want to clarify one thing I was saying before. When I was talking about basically the transparency of CCC, I just meant in general compared to even other agencies in Massachusetts. Things like this, there's always going to be brick walls, but that's the beauty of having I mean, honestly, one of my issues with, like, again, this is an extreme situation, but one of my issues with just going after dispensaries whenever is that if we go through all paperwork, everybody's is a disaster. I mean, if it's an absolute mess. But it's there and we can always look at it. So when something like this comes up, we're able to pull so much stuff. There's so much stuff already in existence. Who was involved? Whether reports or even just early application information. When you look at those early applications and it's like one set of names and then that set of names is gone and it's a whole different group of people. I mean, it's just there's alarm bells everywhere. So that's all I just wanted to clarify what I meant. There's just a lot of information, so we can always dig when something like this goes down.
Yeah. And we all know that once information gets out there, it does tend to take on a life of its own and even a direction of its own, let's just say, because we're all human and we all can look at the same fact and report it differently. That being said, I want to get Josh's opinion here because he's out on the West Coast in Washington State. And now he's listening to two media people in Boston talking about a story that has gone national. I want to ask you right off the bat, Josh, did you know about this story about this TrueLeave employee who passed away?
Yes.
Okay. And how did you hear about it?
Well, it's always the thing where like nobody's ever died from cannabis. So like as soon as like some guy eats an edible and jumps off a roof and impales himself, it's like, see, I told you it was deadly.
Who was that wrote that stupid headline, by the way? Who's responsible for saying that this was a cannabis death?
I don't remember.
F them, whoever it was.
Well, hey, Chris, you know this, and Tori, knows this. Tori knows about teases. Okay, the headline gets the attention, so it's designed to draw you in, whether it is whether that story supports the headline or not. That's the nature of the
Jimmy.
media.
That's why I'm sentenced to a lifetime of independent media.
Right, I get it. So, are you writing your own headlines?
That drives me nuts, and I'm glad that you're outing. I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, at least I understand it.
I'm talking about him bringing up that that this was the story that we kept hearing. This was a cannabis death, right?
Right. So let's go back, of course, because the other media perhaps is not as enlightened as the people in this forum right now. Okay, are looking for. Not necessarily looking for reasons for the industry to fail, but every time that the industry stubs its toe, it's a lead story on the news. And I'm going to add this in, how many other workplace fatal deaths have happened in other industries that we just don't hear about?
But so if you remove the fatality of it, I think we see a lot of this. When I was up in Canada in Vancouver working for a company, and I'm going to out them, called Agrima Botanical. They're literally the only company that lost their license up in Canada. I was working with them on a fully automated joint rolling machine, and I'm looking at this package, whatever, and it's got a bag tag on it and whatever, but they're not supposed to be making stuff yet. Like 2.0 hadn't rolled out. You're not supposed to be making vape carts and all these 2.0 products. Interesting. Okay. And then you find out like they literally lost their license because they got slapped on the wrist. 6 months later, the agents came in and they found the same thing. They were literally like trying to sell this stuff. So all of the family and friends that invested in those companies, they were one of the first 15 companies to get an international license. The stupidity of it all is my point of this is that they lost all of it for greed and stupidity. And that is rampant in this industry. And eventually it can lead to death.
Can I just ask, were they publicly traded?
They were.
Yeah, I think I lost a couple on that one myself.
Yeah.
I'd like to play devil's advocate for a second, Jimmy, if I can. I totally agree with everybody's point that there's safety issues across the board. No one's perfect. This is a new industry, all that. Here's what I think a lot of people are worried about is that companies like TrueLeave that operate in 9 states, not just Massachusetts, that this process is potentially, I am not accusing anybody here. This is just this is rhetoric here. This is a potential situation. But TrueLeave operates in 9 states. So I think what a lot of people are worried about is companies like this, the process of the investigation perhaps being treated differently than it may be for a family business out of Haverhill, that doesn't have the capital and the support and the team that TrueLeave has. That's what people are concerned about. It's not just slap on it's the principle of companies being treated differently when these issues come up. It's
Right.
the principle of holding accountability to these companies and making sure that the big guys are treated the same as the little guys, because no matter how you want to spin it, even though people are making billions of dollars off this industry, there's always going to be a legacy community that is holding on to the values of this industry and will not let it go willfully to these large companies who are just doing whatever they want, because that's not what the roots of this industry, the community, the medicine of it come from. So I think that's what people's main concern is this process needs to be handled swiftly and justly now so that the precedent is set for the future.
Yeah.
I want to add in that and I really don't think I'm disagreeing or agreeing with you. I think there's I don't know where this fits in, but with this issue in particular, I've toured, and I'm sure we all have, right? A lot of manufacturing, a lot of operations, and the places that are proud to show me around. This does not seem like something that would happen there. It's just it's not the rolling room is never a place that is like, oh wow, everyone's so happy here. But it's not, the ones, especially the last 2 I saw, are just not oppressive. There's some space. It's more of a science. This just, I don't know. So, and I don't know exactly I haven't seen pictures of the TrueLeave room, but all I'm going to say is we get, complaints at the newspaper from about small operators as much as we do about the big ones. And I think when it comes to kind of having these systems, that would prevent this kind of situation, I think, if we're talking room and space and ventilation, I don't know, as far as when you talk about equal justice being meted out, I just wasn't sure exactly what you mean, because I think, I guess it has to be when we're talking about life or death situation like ventilation, everybody's got to be, I guess we agree, because everybody's got to be treated the same to some degree to make sure this happens. And I know we're talking about manufacturing here, and cultivation, but I will say that, for better or worse, and I really mean that, the CCC is not cracking down on everybody for everything. We all know that there's tons of dispensaries violating just tons, not of bad laws, I think, but just the basic ones, menu wise, accessibility wise, where the stuff is. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but I guess I hope I would imagine we agree on the fact that we don't want the CCC running around shutting down mom and pop shops over little stuff.
Right.
This is a different situation.
Right.
No, and they should know what they're doing, but it's at a snail's pace. The OSHA came to Washington State in 2015. So I was on a farm when they were there, and they were trying to learn about all the various processing and writing their own SOPs and trying to figure out the safety precautions, but they just haven't kept up to the scale and the speed, and they haven't dedicated those resources in order to really know what's going on. Just like a lot of the hemp farmers that were harvesting in like 2018 or 2019, that like as they're harvesting, they're like, oh hey, we need drying equipment. Like they're figuring it out on the fly too, and you can't expect the federal government to like be on top of it. Like they're going to be way behind.
Right. And if you're looking for drying equipment, Canatrol is killing it in this market. And if you guys know, I know the Sandelman, so I always plug them. And I was touring Van Garden, Chris, out in Leicester, Mass. Really state-of-the-art facility.
That's John Napoli's thing.
Right.
Props to John Napoli, legend of this industry. Before John Napoli was getting in trouble for selling growing equipment in Roxbury, and for the Hempist founder, just an absolute. It's great to see people like him kind of make the transfer over to the cannabis industry and everything. But props to the Hempist and everything he's done for sure.
Yeah. Hey, let me ask you guys a question. Both media people here, and of course, Josh is now a host of a podcast that gets lots of great guests. So I recommend the Talking Heads. You can find that on our YouTube channel as well. I want to ask you guys about the time. Both all of us on this show, I know, have heard these stories, and actually, there's one on this panel. If she'd like to share, she can. Cannabis has saved my life. Cannabis has changed my life. Some of these stories, the Stephen Mandilli story alone, Chris, in our own backyard, where his wife shared a joint with him right before he was going to kill himself, and it changed his life. And then he becomes an advocate for PTSD treatment with cannabis, and testifying in Washington, D.C. on a somewhat regular basis for veteran access to cannabis. There are so many of those types of stories. Why do we have to cover it all as media? Media has to cover it all because they're storytellers. You're on the beat and you want to share information with the public. And we're in a learning curve period of time in the development of this industry. Will we ever see balanced reporting every time that there's a perhaps negative story about this industry? Can we balance it with a positive story? Because I know hundreds, if not thousands, of amazing, incredible survival stories of people who have used this product that has either saved, enhanced, or changed their lives.
I mean, I don't know if there's a question there, but will we ever see balance? I mean, it's
I
kind of
want balance.
I mean, I hate I'm the alternative media guy, so balance is baloney to me. I mean, it's kind of like, but I've never sought it, but I with cannabis, I always say I've always equated it to, I'm old enough now, I'm 42, that when I first moved here and became a reporter in Massachusetts, it's when same-sex marriage was on the ballot, and I covered that, and that everything, that was also in the national spotlight, of course, and I remember back then the Globe, even the Boston Globe, the mainstream as it gets, would quote like homophobe, crazy anti-gay people who would say that who was in the newspaper, they would run quotes that said, this will lead to animals having sex with people and stuff like that. And of course, now that's unthinkable. It's unthinkable that anybody really would quote that. Well, okay, so cannabis was 10 years behind because, folks, the Globe, which went and had 6 weed reporters at one point, right? And of course, I hate them. It goes without saying, right? When they had 6 weed reporters at one point, the year before had actually opined against the ballot initiative that got us recreational cannabis. And 5 years before that, or I'm sorry, right then, at that juncture, they were actually quoting junk science. They were quoting the kinds of people who, just get real quick, everybody can look up the legendary Keith Saunders article for us, where, there's one of these prohibitionists, I forget his name, just some ass who used to show up everywhere. And he brought, he had these 2 bags of gummies, and we stole them from the behind the podium at the event, and we brought them both to get tested. He was saying that one was one was medicated, one was not, one was abused, and how could a kid tell the difference? And neither was. He was full of it, of course. But my point is, guys like that were still being quoted, and still they still sometimes are. But I would say, as far as balance, I think at this point, it's not. I am the guy who just hates mainstream media. This is not something I even lose any sleep over anymore. There's great work even being done at television stations and everywhere. And as for the doing the individual saved my life stories, I think listen, this one will reach that person, that one will reach another person. I'm not against it. I'll say sometimes the reporting's a little shaky on that stuff. We hear about cancer being, and we also saw, of course, a lot of crossover with the anti-vax community and the cannabis community, the nut jobs in that realm during COVID. So I don't like to just write down everything everybody says about how this cured that, and that cured this. But at the same time, I'd say, we're not in the world we used to be. There's way more pro-cannabis coverage than anti. The only anti stuff I would say that I see a lot, because of course here's my plug for the newsletter. We literally go through hundreds of articles to decide what ones we're going to share every week. And the only real, I'd say, prohibitionist stuff, and they don't even mean it like that, but that's what it is people really like to latch on to a little bit of a study, and every week there's one. that says,
Right.
you know, cannabis, weed makes your balls shrink, weed does this, weed does that. And maybe we'll know someday, but the second line of the story is always, we don't know shit yet. So
Yeah. Tori, I got to get your feeling on this. Growing up in California and being part of that scene 10 years ago, is it balanced, any more balanced in California? Or I'm not talking about media coverage of the industry.
You know, I think Chris leads into a good point that I want to say. I think we're getting toward more balance, but I think true balanced coverage of this industry is going to take support on two different levels. First and foremost, from the government, they need to go ahead and deschedule the plant so that we can actually have real scientific coverage, right? Or scientific studies, because no one, just like Chris just said, at the end of the day, no one actually knows, because nothing can be peer reviewed, nothing can be checked over. So until the White House, TikTok, you've been given the green light, goes ahead and reschedules or ideally deschedules the plant, then we can go ahead and start having real conversations about unbiased scientific information behind the plant and go from there.
Yeah.
I also think journalism on any level requires support from the consumers. And I give this tough love a little bit as a news producer. It's 2022. Nobody is going to hand you information on a silver platter ready to go anymore. You've got to sift through it. There's a F ton of information out there. It's oversaturation. So you have to be a critically thinking consumer when you're consuming information, when you're consuming media. You can't always just take it for surface level. So I think if people support people like, you know, Chris, myself, I think Grant Smith Ellis is another person who does a great job of like unbiased cannabis reporting, giving all angles of stuff. Supporting those people and their content will put those people in a position to give that balanced information, but I think it's going to require that support on both sides.
I got to get an opinion from Chris. We're almost up against it at this point. Real quick, Chris, how frustrating is it to someone who understands this plant like you do, and you cannot put any public service announcements in mainstream media? Is that frustrating?
Were you kidding, right? I love it. That's
Because they get to read you.
It's the only thing that we get that they don't. I mean, right now the big media and you know, Channel 4, 5, you name it, is gorging on campaign money.
Right.
We don't get a dollar of any of that. So, and I gotta say, Jeremy, not, you know, I'm only 42, but the people before me, my mentors, they had their offices raided. You know, the Dig is 25 years old this year. We've been covering cannabis the whole time. It hasn't always. We've had to change banks because of the amount of dispensary dollars that we take in. My point is, we deserve this. I could care less if the mainstream ever does it. They were against it for years, and they'll always get a piece of it. So there'll be there's plenty for them. There's plenty for everybody. But for now, this is keeping a lot of independent media going.
There you go. I get you. And I had a feeling that's what was going to come out of that too, which I appreciate. Hey, Chris and Tori, you two should have your own show. I'm just saying, okay? I thought you guys did a great job, and you have a tremendous insight on what's going on in the Boston market anyway, Massachusetts market. And I thought that this story with True Leaf would certainly be something that we should all talk about. And by the way, I saw Kim Rivers, their CEO, on Thursday in New York. And I did walk up to her and I did say, if you would like to make a statement, if you would like to come on my show and talk about what happened, you are welcome at any time. Now, did she say, oh yeah, I really want to come on? No, she did not. However, I did notice at the same time that corporate office released their official statement. And Tori, I know you added it into your news this week, which follows this particular really live talk show. So again, we're all in it together. We all know what I say. It really is one of the reasons why I love this saying. I love to close our broadcasts, our podcasts, our talk shows, whatever the hell you want to call these things, with the same. It is a whole new world of weed out there. We all need to learn about it. We're all in this together, trying to figure out what is going to happen with this plant that God put on this earth thousands of years ago for medicinal purposes. All right, that's gonna be my last word, folks. So for Chris Ferrone and Tori Chamberlain and Josh Kincaid and Dan French, who directs this whole thing, and Isabel Turner out there in California helping us out as well. I'm Jimmy Young. I don't need to say it, do I? You know. Use it responsibly, and we'll see you next week.
Coming up on We Talk News this week, Senator Cory Booker says cannabis reform is possible with a lame duck Congress. Trulieve issues a statement about their workplace accident in Holyoke, Massachusetts. And yes, weed is on the ballot in just 2 weeks, and 5 states will leave it to their voters to legalize. Germany gives the green light for legalization of cannabis in that European nation. All that and coast-to-coast cannabis news reports on We Talk News next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hey everyone, I'm Tori Chamberlain in for Elena Pinto this week, and welcome to Weed Talk News. We took a break last week, but we're right back to it to bring you some of the highest headlines going on in the world of weed. So let's get right to it. One of the biggest stories to probably catch you up on is what's going on with the ongoing investigation into the death of a Trulieve employee in Massachusetts. While Lorna McMurray passed away in January of this year, news of her death didn't really make headlines until last month. And since then, many eyes have been on the company in question, Trulieve, and the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, who says it's been investigating the company since last year. But Trulieve officials have been relatively quiet about the situation, that is, until now. Trulieve released a statement that reads in part, "Unfortunately, some incorrect information has been distributed about Trulieve's facility in Holyoke and its response to Ms. McMurray's collapse on January 4th, 2022. The company goes on to say, the air quality of the facility was up to standard and uses several pieces of equipment to maintain what it calls a healthy environment. That the company also provides N95 masks to its employees, and that Lorna McMurray wore one of those masks the day of her death, contrary to reports that her mask was paper, according to the company." And even more in depth, Trulieve says that Lorna was working in a pre-roll area, not a flower grinding room. They also say Lorna reported that she wasn't feeling well at work that day and was told she could go home, but instead opted to remain at work. The company says the opposite was falsely reported when the news first broke. Trulieve goes on to say it looks forward to working with OSHA and the Massachusetts CCC to establish new best practices, and we'll have to wait and see just what those new practices will be. Right now, it looks like all eyes are on the Cannabis Control Commission, which, due to state law, says there's not a lot of information it can release about the investigation into Trulieve at this time. Meanwhile, MassLive.com reports that Holyoke City Councilor Linda Vacone has filed an order calling for state permission to inspect large cannabis cultivation facilities and manufacturing facilities to ensure that provisions for workers' health and safety are actually being followed. Now, over on Capitol Hill, Senator Cory Booker says Congress has a, quote, good shot of passing some kind of cannabis reform measures during the upcoming lame duck session, which will follow the November midterm election. In an interview with NJ.com, Booker says that congressional leaders are engaged in what he calls, quote, active negotiations over a package of proposals that could include banking and justice reform on some level. And speaking of the midterm election, we're just a few weeks away from that now, and the crucial polling date. 5 states will be deciding whether or not to legalize cannabis for adult use. They include Arkansas, Maryland, North and South Dakota, and as we've been reporting, Missouri. Over the pond, Europe is getting a little bit greener. Federal officials in Germany say they've officially approved a plan to legalize cannabis nationwide. But they also say the final decision depends on whether international and European policy is actually going to allow it to happen. Our new European correspondent, Lex Pelger, has the story.
Hello, I'm Lex Pelger of White Whale Creations, and for Weed Talk News, this is a European Cannabis Report. The big news is that Germany is going legal. After a report was leaked last week, the government confirmed that indeed next year it will be adult use cannabis in Germany, the EU's largest market. People will be allowed to have up to 30 grams regardless of their source, but legal cannabis will be bought from dispensaries and pharmacies. You'll also be allowed to grow up to 3 plants on your own. They will not allow any advertising, and the legal limit may be 18, it may be 21. But people will not be prosecuted anymore for things that were illegal and are now legal. All of this is great news because of this trend-setting nation, and this will be great for businesses and for patients in Germany. In France, a lawmaker filed a bill to legalize cannabis through the taxation system. This is unlikely to pass, but is a sign of opening in the most regressive of the major European powers. France does have a medical program, but it's very small and it's a pilot program. They're even very aggressive on CBD and try to get it banned at the EU level. So there's a small sign of opening in France. In Luxembourg, after complaints from patients led to a review, the health minister confirmed that cannabis will still only be sold from pharmacies located inside hospitals and not other pharmacies across the country. Despite this inconvenience, he says it's necessary to keep a proper control on cannabis. I'm Lex Pelger, and this was the European Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. To hear more on the science side, follow my free weekly newsletter, Cannabinoids and the People.
Back in the U.S. Capitol, White House drug czar and director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, Rahul Gupta, is solidifying his support for scientific research behind cannabis. During an interview with the Washington Post, Gupta was asked about when the federal scheduling of cannabis will be reviewed, to which he only replied, expeditiously. But he did double down on the need for more scientific research that could come along with that rescheduling or descheduling change.
We know that there have been documented and clearly data is behind certain medical uses for cannabis. We also know at the same time that there's plenty of evidence that when we talk about children and their growing brain, use of marijuana does impact negatively in terms of your areas of where their emotion and learning and decision making, all those get impacted as well. So just as any substance for growing brain isn't good, it isn't good for children and adolescents as well. But that doesn't nullify the medical benefits that have been documented in science over the years. And a lot of this is developing science. I mean, there's been bans on marijuana, and that's resulted in a deficiency of literature and science and scientific research behind it. So I'm glad that we're able to see more science develop, so we will get closer to the truth that we can. To me, as a scientist, it's really important to know, hey, what are the effects, both good and bad, so we can make good, sound policy based on that data.
And big news for another Canadian company, Ontario-based Canopy Growth says it's planning to consolidate its U.S. assets into a new holding company in order to speed up its entry into the U.S. legal market. But MJ Biz Daily is reporting the NASDAQ is objecting to that idea. Deborah Borchardt has all the details in this week's Green Market Report.
This is the business update from the Green Market Report. This week, Canopy Growth surprised the markets with news that it was creating a canopy holding company for its U.S. properties. The Canadian company had options to acquire some American cannabis companies like Acreage Holdings and Wana Brands, but those deals weren't supposed to happen until cannabis was federally legalized. Now it seems Canopy has decided not to wait until that happens. The question, though, is whether NASDAQ will allow the company to continue to trade on its exchange, and so far it looks like they aren't on board with Canopy's plans. The SEC has been busy this week with bad actors in the cannabis industry. Kronos Group settled with the SEC for some accounting errors. The company agreed to pay over $1.3 million as a settlement, and their accountant was also fined and barred from serving in that capacity for the next 3 years. The SEC also addressed false statements at New Age Beverage and missing financial documents from Canawake. And finally, Verano is being sued by Goodness Growth over the company's decision to walk away from the planned acquisition. In addition to that, Verano has refinanced its debt and pushed out its maturity dates. The company's also going to lean harder on debt secured by its real estate holdings. I'm Deborah Borchardt, and this has been the business update from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
In another big cannabis change, leadership is shifting at the Council for Federal Cannabis Regulation. Cannabis Business Times reports that veteran industry executive and investment expert Deborah Johnson will take the reins of the council as interim executive director Sarah Chase takes on a new position. The CFCR is recognized as a leading voice with the FDA as the agency works to develop a regulatory framework for cannabis products all across the board. And back in Washington, D.C., local lawmakers there have approved a bill that would significantly reshape the district's medical marijuana program. And this is all according to Marijuana Moment. It would include eliminating licensing caps for medical marijuana businesses, which is huge, promoting social equity in the industry, and creating new regulated business categories such as on-site consumption facilities and even cannabis cooking classes. The bill would also permanently codify a temporary current law that allows adults to self-certify themselves as patients, which is also really cool. Now, also on the East Coast, a final version of a medical cannabis law in Pennsylvania is now ready to go, and our Pennsylvania correspondent, Claudia Post, has a closer look at that.
I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'm here in the Keystone State, Pennsylvania, reporting for Weed Talk News. From the final version of Pennsylvania's medical marijuana law, patients will get safer products and better service at dispensaries. However, growers and processors predict production headaches and delays and possibly higher prices. One of the best pieces of news for patients is a requirement that medical marijuana dispensaries must have a pharmacist available either on site or remotely during all business hours. Patients were frustrated because they couldn't get answers to questions about which products to use, which is best for them, and of course, the appropriate dose. The Pennsylvania Cannabis Coalition announced on October 24th that the trade organization has released results of a candidate survey aimed at gauging elected officials' stance on cannabis policy ahead of the November election. The survey results revealed that 16 Democrat and 10 Republican Senate candidates reported that they support medical cannabis, with 8 Democratic candidates signaling support for adult use. That would be terrific. The results also showed that 95 Democrats and 59 Republicans as they're vying for office in the House support medical cannabis. Several Republican legislators who weren't supportive of the state's cannabis program at its inception are now supportive for the reason that the industry can generate billions in revenue. Philadelphia's medical marijuana dispensary Curaleaf is being sued for allegedly breaking the city's Fair Workweek law. The former employee alleges the cannabis retailer violated the law, which requires employers to provide predictable and regular scheduling for workers. Another former employee filed a complaint that managers routinely flip their schedules and fail to compensate workers for abrupt changes. In an email statement, Curaleaf vowed to fight the claims in court. Well, that's the wrap from Pennsylvania. I'm Claudia Post from Scarlet Express, and I'll be back next week to talk about what's hot and what's not in Pennsylvania. From Weed Talk News, have a fabulous week.
Pennsylvania isn't the only place where Curaleaf has had recent legal trouble. The Boston Business Journal reports that the company admitted to accidentally filling hundreds of containers marked as CBD with THC instead, blaming it on, quote, unintentional human error. But the thing is, these products were put on shelves for sale in Oregon, and a lot of people bought them without knowing what they were getting into. So Curaleaf has since agreed to a $100,000 settlement in a class action lawsuit for that incident. With that, let's check in now with Marianne Kersegi with more happening out of Oregon this week.
I'm Marianne from Alibi Cannabis with this week's Oregon Cannabis Report for Weed Talk News. Outdoor harvests in Southern Oregon are mostly finished by now. Early reports are that there were half as many metric tags this year compared to last year. So hopefully this results in less product in a highly saturated market. More news on the hotly contested Oregon governor's race. Bernie Sanders is in town today to garner support for the Democratic nominee. And finally, Curaleaf has agreed to pay another $100,000 to settle a class action lawsuit over mislabeling. Last year, they mislabeled tinctures as containing only CBD, when in fact they contained THC, which caused severe and unexpected reactions. That'll do it for the Oregon Report this week. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Weed Talk News.
Traveling to the Midwest now, markets there are blooming, including in Illinois. While the state has offered edible sales since legalization of adult use cannabis kicked in, it hasn't been until now that there was a company to produce those products right there on home turf. Thomas Howard has the details in this week's Illinois Report.
Hey, it's me, cannabis industry lawyer Tom Howard here with Weed Talk News. Here's an update from the news in Illinois the past couple of weeks. First, an infuser license is actually open for business. It has been over 2 years, but the first infuser license has opened for business in the state of Illinois in the small town of Pekin, Illinois. And it is the Crown LLC was the name of that infuser. Interestingly enough, well-known multi-state operator Wild has partnered with Crown, perhaps through a licensing agreement to get their products into the Illinois market. Not only that, in Illinois cannabis news, also today in the court hearing for the craft growers, all of the cases have now officially been consolidated and assigned to the judge that is going to hear the matter. So the craft grow appeals are moving forward. Not only that, what else is going on in Illinois cannabis? People are just working toward opening their dispensaries that they want, and the market for craft grow licenses is hot. It's hot because you're allowed to sell them. You're not allowed to sell the dispensary licenses yet. You have to get those open first. And so that's creating a lot of interesting financial relationships between the license holders and their creditors. Not much else going on in cannabis news in the state of Illinois. Still a slow rollout, but we do have now an infuser that's operating and also one craft grow that's operating. By the end of the year, we anticipate at least 5 to 10 more craft grows joining that one. And that's all we have from Illinois this week. Thanks. Don't forget to catch me on cannabis legalization news on Sundays.
There is a new sheriff in town, or in the state of Michigan, that is. Michigan's Cannabis Regulatory Agency has a new acting director, and he says he's planning to crack down on bad actors and illicit operations going on in the state. With that, let's check in with Michigan Normal Executive Director, Rick Thompson.
Hello again, everyone. This is the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News. Let's begin. There are lots of concerns flying around regarding the investigation into former House Speaker Lee Chatfield and his corrupt connections within the Cannabis Regulatory Agency, with cannabis entrepreneurs, and with other lawmakers. Chatfield seemingly used his influence to secure jobs for his relatives, 3 of them at a single cannabis company in Ann Arbor, and it initially appears his corrupt influence was felt in the drafting of legislation. The timing of certain actions look to have been coordinated between congressional Republicans, the MCMA, and actors within the state government. The too close relationship between lobbyists who work for the state's largest cannabis industry players and those who are in charge of the cannabis program in the state has already been scrutinized by investigators. And since their investigation seems to be continuing forward in that direction, it seems like there's some fire where we can see some smoke. Now, who will be snagged in this investigation? Who gave more than a reasonable amount of attention to the influence peddlers in the legislature? If justice is to be done, let the investigation be a full, fair, and exhaustive process, and let all the facts be published and available for we, the people, to evaluate and draw conclusions from. Well, the new director of the Cannabis Regulatory Agency, Brian Hanna, had an important press conference this week in which he stated his goal of eliminating any illegal sourcing of cannabis within Michigan's regulated industry. Mr. Hanna has already stated his short-term 90-day goals, which include reasonable and necessary steps toward eliminating the cheats and liars within the regulated marketplace. Here's one quote from the press release. If there's anybody cutting corners or cheating, we want to expose that and take a strong enforcement approach on that, per Director Hanna. Prior to Hanna taking the top spot at the CRA, the agency's budget was increased by $2 million in the current fiscal year, and the agency has hired 10 additional employees. Hanna said the extra staff was dedicated to weeding out the instances of illicit product making it into the regulated marketplace. These actions come at a time of great contradiction, where pricing is falling faster than Kanye's career, supply is oversaturating the market, and questions of how and why this is happening are being asked by those both within and outside of the regulated marketplace. If Hanna's efforts pay off and the bad actors in the market are identified, we all hope that enforcement actions will occur much faster than the 17 months it took to reach a penalty agreement with House of Mary Jane, which was a Detroit retailer busted with bags of unregulated product on their premises. Stopping the cheats is a reasonable and worthy place to put the CRA's enforcement efforts. I do hope to be able to report on more successful interdictions of illegal activity surrounding the regulated cannabis industry during future episodes of the Michigan Report. Well, Detroit's past overdependence on raiding cannabis operations has finally been exposed, and it came by the city's annual financial report. Now, the difference is a shocking one. In 2012, the city reported making drug raids at a rate of 3,462 in a single fiscal year. You know, that's about 10 raids each and every day. I can tell you, as someone who was involved in the industry during 2012, the Detroit Police Department made raids which never resulted in any official paperwork, including raids into Oakland, Macomb, and Genesee counties. Now let's fast forward to 2021, just 10 years later, and the number of drug raids has dropped to 186, which is an average of about one raid every 2 days. Now, why such a sharp decline? Because Detroit's not raiding cannabis operations anymore, according to the Detroit Police Department spokesperson. There has never been a more sharp piece of evidence illustrating the over-policing of cannabis in Michigan than the statistics provided by the city of Detroit. And over-policing is the right way to describe how Detroit and other large cities have given too much attention to cannabis, a substance which causes no deaths and is rarely, if ever, associated with violence. Contrast that to the crime statistics reported by the DPD itself, which includes 3 out of 10 Detroiters were the victim of a crime last year. Murders are up by more than 4%, and the number of innocent youth being killed or injured by gun violence is at an all-time high. Well, methamphetamine, fentanyl, cocaine, and heroin are all present in every major city in the state, and in most minor towns and villages too. So here's hoping other municipal police departments follow Detroit's lead and stand down on both raiding and caring about those people who cultivate or use cannabis for personal benefit. Well, let's stick with Detroit for a moment and announce that the initial application period for adult use cannabis businesses in Michigan's largest city has concluded. During their 1-month open applications period, the city received more than 90 applications for just 60 cannabis retail licenses that they're offering at this first stage of the city's controversial licensing process. Now, those 90 applications are composed of 50 non-equity applicants and 40 applicants who qualify for Detroit's legacy status. In order to ensure the city's approval process is untainted by influence or bias, City Council yesterday nominated an attorney for Macomb County to oversee the award process. City Council has 7 days to either go with their nominee or replace them before the proposal is presented to Mayor Mike Duggan for approval. The city will eventually approve 160 licenses for cannabis retailers, micro businesses, and cannabis social consumption lounges. Although there is still a lawsuit against the licensing process pending in federal court, it's great to see Detroit pushing forward into the adult use marketplace And we certainly hope all this applying and approving is not in vain. And that's it for the Michigan Report with Rick Thompson on Weed Talk News.
There could be trouble in your CBD. Hemp Today reports that a team of researchers recently conducted an analysis on more than 500 CBD products, and get this, they found the labeling of those products is often deficient with, quote, substantial discrepancy between the product label claims for potency that's on the label there and the amount actually measured in both edible and topical products. And not only that, but the researchers also found, quote, low-level contamination of edible CBD products with heavy metals and phthalates or plastics was pervasive. That means there was plastic and metal found often in these CBD edible and topical products. So the rest of those findings will be available in a soon-to-be published paper on edibles and topicals. Until then, and always, be wary of where you're getting your CBD products. And another illicit market that's seeming to thrive right now is in New Jersey. Some smoke shops are reportedly finding clever ways to illegally sell cannabis to customers without meeting state compliant laws. But regulators say they're ready to crack down. Here's Jill Goldsberry with that story and more from the Garden State this week.
New Jersey cannabis lovers, I am back with what's happening in cannabis news in our state. Well, New Jersey has become quite familiar with multi-state operator Curaleaf dispensaries here. And Curaleaf is bringing in some new products to add to their New Jersey stores. Starting very soon, clients will be able to experience and purchase products from Find Cannabis. This is a New England brand that is of high quality flower products and will be available very soon, probably starting next month. You'll see them in the stores. In other news, the robust market in New Jersey has created another gray market where local smoke shops are selling legal cannabis illegally, meaning they are smoke shops pretty much taking sales into their own hands. Particularly, this has been happening in Jersey City and Newark. Law officials are cracking down on the unregulated market. However, according to Paul Argument of Normal, the problem is that there have been very few licenses granted in these markets. Not granting the licenses in New Jersey's largest cities is where there is a high demand, has created a thriving gray market. But officials will continue to crack down on smoke shops and their owners and offenders, and they will face prosecution and possibly loss of business. And that's what's happening in New Jersey. I'm Jill Goldsberry for We Talk News.
And finally, the pro-cannabis media team attended the ArcView Investment Summit in New York City last week. The fund is one of the oldest in the U.S., started by Steve D'Angelo and Troy Dayton. They've managed $500 million in assets over 10 years of operating in the industry. This event in particular included hundreds of entrepreneurs and dozens of investors looking to expand in the industry. And among the attendees was New York City's new drug czar, well-known industry advocate Dashida Dawson, who is now taking on the role of founding director of the new Cannabis NYC initiative, where she will lead the agency's support of the burgeoning cannabis industry in New York City.
It is, for me, a real honor to be on this stage welcoming you this morning. And it's an honor because when I really think about the impact that this organization has had on the industry, long before I was involved, and really on the backs of Troy Dayton and Steve D'Angelo, who you're going to hear from shortly.
In California, from 2006 to 2018, we created an incredible medical cannabis nonprofit, loosely regulated system that was tremendously effective, that built the cannabis market by orders of magnitude almost every year because it works so well.
But right now is a funny time in the cannabis world, right? As we try, as legacy operators, to find a common ground with legislation and regulation.
And I only had autoimmune issues. It was an invisible disease that people, and it is, that people don't understand. So I stand here with early MS, and really understanding that cannabis helps me be my best self every day, my most productive self. And probably, yes. And I'm probably one of the most productive individuals that my friends and family know. And that is how the weed head really started to change people's minds, whether it's Senator Liz Kruger or Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes. I quickly got a name for myself of pairing science with my background in molecular biology and business with my background as a Fortune 100 business strategist, and with patient and consumer needs.
It'll be exciting to see how things keep developing in the Big Apple. After all, it is a whole new world of weed out there, and remember to keep using it wisely. For now, I'm Tori Chamberlain for Pro Cannabis Media and Weed Talk News. We'll see you next time.
As a broker, we have access to many, many cannabis carriers. So I will go in with 2 or 3 quotes for people. The quotes might be $20,000 for one, $22,000 for another, $17,500 for another. Pretty close among the 3. What I tell people is it's not the pricing, it's what's included and not included, meaning exclusions. An exclusion in layman's terms is just something that's not included. It's not on the menu. So it's just not included. But if you don't know that, if no one shows you that on page 71 of a 150-page policy, you're not going to know. No one knows. I never met one person that says they read an insurance policy. If you do, I got some property in Florida for you.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are 2 productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first.
So the reality of the matter is, big banks and small banks are going to be different in a lot of ways. And they're both going to have their advantages and disadvantages. For a business like cannabis, you really have to have an integral knowledge of that business and a real granular knowledge of that business and the players involved in it. And that's why if you look at the banks that are successful to play in this space in Massachusetts, they are smaller banks that are very heavy, intensified personal touch, human communication, where you don't get a lot of that with the bigger banks.
We've got breaking news for all farmers and growers out there. How would you like to defer the taxes you pay on your grow? Now you can legally, thanks to a discovery by agricultural tax attorney Michael Berwick of the law firm Greenspoon Martyr.
I have been working with tax deferral for 20 years, and my team at Greenspoon Martyr in the tax area